We warmly welcome you to our presentation. This video is part of our Australian literature assignment, where we explore two significant works of Australian bush literature, The Chosen Vessel by Barbara Baynton and The Drover's Wife by Henry Lawson. Before we begin, let us introduce our team members. Our team consists of Vincy, Binisha, Swarnarekha, Rithika S, and Rithika V. Together, we have worked collaboratively to examine these texts and understand their literary and cultural significance. In this video, we will be covering the following contents. First, the historical background of both texts, focusing on the social and literary context of late 19th century Australia. Next, a detailed thematic analysis of The Chosen Vessel and The Drover's Wife, exploring key ideas such as isolation, gender roles, survival, and the harshness of the Australian bush. Finally, we will present a comparative study of both texts, highlighting their similarities and differences in portrayal of women, landscape, and bush life. We hope this presentation provides a deeper understanding of how these two authors represent the realities of Australian frontier life. Let us begin.
Historical Background of The Chosen Vessel by Barbara Baynton. Introduction. Barbara Baynton's The Chosen Vessel, 1896, emerges from the socio-historical realities of late 19th century colonial Australia, particularly the harsh and isolated life of the rural bush. Written during the period of Australian nationalism and the rise of bush literature, the story offers a radical counter-narrative to the romanticized vision of the outback, popularized by male writers of the time. Instead of presenting the bush as a site of mateship, heroism, and endurance, Baynton exposes it as a place of violence, gendered vulnerability, and social neglect. Understanding the historical context of the 1890s, marked by colonial expansion, patriarchal social structures, and the dominance of the bulletin literary culture, is essential to interpreting the story's themes and its critique of Australian identity. Colonial Australia and the bush environment. In the late 19th century, Australia was still a group of British colonies moving toward federation, which would occur in 1901. Much of the population lived in rural and semi-rural areas known as the back blocks, where settlers occupied small, isolated huts far from towns, police stations, or medical assistance. Transport and communication were extremely limited. Distances were vast, and neighbors could be miles apart. This isolation created a precarious existence, particularly for women, who were often left alone while their husbands worked as drovers, shearers, or laborers on distant stations. The bush itself was a symbol of national identity during this period. It was celebrated in literature as the proving ground of Australian masculinity, where men formed bonds of mateship and developed resilience against the harsh landscape. However, this myth largely ignored women's experiences. Baynton's story challenges this nationalist ideal by revealing the bush as a threatening and indifferent environment that offers no protection to the vulnerable. The physical isolation of the unnamed woman in the story reflects the historical reality of many settler women who faced loneliness, fear, and danger in remote homesteads. The role of itinerant laborers and social insecurity. Another important historical factor is the presence of itinerant male workers, commonly known as swagmen or tramps. Economic depression in the 1890s led to widespread unemployment, and many men traveled from place to place seeking food and temporary work. While bush mythology often portrayed swagmen as harmless and even humorous figures, they also represented a source of anxiety for isolated households. With little policing in remote areas, women and children were particularly vulnerable to intrusions. In The Chosen Vessel, the swagman becomes the embodiment of this threat. His presence reflects the social insecurity of rural life, where strangers could approach isolated huts without warning. Baynton's portrayal is historically grounded in the realities of the time, but diverges sharply from the sentimental depiction of the swagman found in nationalist ballads and
Barbara Baynton's The Chosen Vessel is a haunting exploration of isolation and vulnerability set against the backdrop of the harsh Australian bush. The story follows a lone woman whose solitary journey enhances her vulnerability, exposing her to the lurking dangers of the unforgiving landscape. Her isolation underscores the psychological tension and fear that permeate her experience, as the absence of nearby assistance amplifies the threats she faces in this remote environment. Baynton underscores the implications of gender in a patriarchal society, presenting the woman's powerlessness when confronted by a menacing swagman. This character embodies the darker aspects of male dominance, illustrating the physical and social limitations that women endure in colonial life, where their safety is constantly compromised. The narrative is suffused with a sense of imminent violence, as the swagman's presence brings a dual threat of both sexual and physical danger. This not only reflects the unpredictability of frontier life but also serves as a reminder of the psychological terror that accompanies such threats. The story's setting in the Australian bush is not merely a passive backdrop, rather, it is portrayed as an indifferent and hostile entity. Nature becomes an active force that highlights human fragility, emphasizing how the landscape intensifies the woman's peril and isolation. Baynton contrasts the woman's innocence and purity with the swagman's moral decay, exploring the fragility of morality in the absence of societal and environmental protections. This juxtaposition reveals how innocence can be easily endangered under extreme circumstances, painting a stark picture of the threats within both society and nature. The narrative intricately explores the fear and psychological tension experienced by the protagonist. Through vivid imagery and her internal monologue, Baynton delves into the protagonist's terror, creating a gripping sense of suspense and helplessness. The psychological horror she endures is profound and lasting, complementing the physical dangers that threaten her existence. Ultimately, The Chosen Vessel serves as a powerful critique of gender inequality and the dangerous realities of isolation. Baynton's work stands out in Australian literature for its unflinching depiction of fear, vulnerability, and the intertwined threats posed by nature and human malevolence. The story, rich with thematic depth, resonantly captures the essence of life on the frontier, revealing the harsh truths that define the experiences of those who dwell in its unforgiving embrace, particularly women caught in the web of societal constraints and natural brutality. Through this intricate narrative, Baynton exposes the complex interplay between innocence, morality, and the omnipresent dangers that characterize colonial life in Australia.
Hello everyone, today I am going to speak about the historical background of The Drover's Wife, a short story written by Henry Lawson in 1892. To truly understand this story, we must first understand the harsh realities of life in the Australian bush during the late 19th century. During this period, Australia was still developing as a young colony. Much of the country consisted of vast isolated bushland, where settlers lived far away from towns and basic facilities. Life was extremely lonely and demanding, especially for families living on remote selections. Roads were poorly developed and access to doctors, schools, and neighbours was rare. This sense of isolation is strongly reflected in The Drover's Wife, where the setting feels endless and unforgiving. Australia's economy at the time depended heavily on sheep and cattle farming, particularly the wool industry. This led to the rise of droving, where men travelled long distances to move livestock to markets. Drovers could be away for months or even years. As a result, many women were left alone to manage households and protect their families. The absence of the husband in The Drover's Wife was not unusual. Instead, it was a common reality for bush families. Living conditions in the bush were extremely basic. Homes were often small slab huts made from timber and bark, with dirt floors and minimal furniture. Kitchens were sometimes built separately, and families had to rely on their own labour for survival. There was no electricity, running water, or modern comfort. These conditions highlight how physically demanding everyday life was for settlers. The bush also posed constant dangers. Bushfires, floods, droughts, wild animals, and venomous snakes were real threats. Illness could easily become fatal due to the lack of medical help. In the story, the snake is not just a dramatic element. It represents the real dangers faced by bush families, especially women left alone to defend their children. Women on the bush frontier carried enormous responsibility. They cooked, cleaned, raised children, worked the land, and protected their homes. They were often described as working like men and leading lonely, exhausting lives. The Drover's Wife symbolizes the strength, resilience, and endurance of these women who quietly held families together under extreme conditions. Henry Lawson's writing was heavily influenced by his own life. He grew up in the bush and witnessed his mother managing the household alone while his father worked away. These experiences allowed Lawson to write with realism and honesty. The Drover's Wife was published in The Bulletin, which supported realistic portrayals of Australian life, rather than romanticized versions of the bush. In conclusion, The Drover's Wife is deeply rooted in its historical context. It reflects the isolation of the bush, the hardships of colonial life, the economic importance of droving, and, most importantly, the strength of bush women. Through this story, Henry Lawson gives a voice to the many women whose struggles were often overlooked in Australian history.
Today we step into the lonely Australian bush through the eyes of one woman. Henry Lawson's The Drover's Wife may seem, at first glance, like a simple story about a mother hunting a snake through her small, fragile home. But beneath that tense night lies something much deeper, a powerful portrait of survival, sacrifice, and silent heroism. Through this single woman's struggle, Lawson reveals 5 profound themes: the hidden strength of women, the crushing weight of isolation, the relentless fight for survival, the harsh, unforgiving Australian landscape, and above all, the quiet, sacrificial power of a mother's love. And in doing so, he strips away the romantic myths of the bush, exposing the gritty truth of frontier life. In Lawson's time, heroes were explorers, soldiers, adventurers. Here, the true hero stands barefoot on a dirt floor, guarding her children from a snake. The Drover's Wife is not heroic because of one dramatic act. She is heroic because she endures. She has survived floods, fires, drought, loneliness, and the monotony of the bush, year after year. When Lawson says she has outlived it, he means something profound. She has survived not just physically, but psychologically. The bush has tried to break her spirit and failed. She wears her husband's clothes when danger strikes. She fights fires with a simple branch. She protects her home like a soldier. Her strength is quiet, uncelebrated, unseen. Yet she is the backbone of the Australian interior, but strength often grows in loneliness. Isolation in this story is not just distance, it is silence. It is emotional abandonment. Her nearest neighbours are miles away. The only visitors are strangers passing through, or wandering sundowners looking for a meal, and she does not even have a name. She is simply the drover's wife. Her identity has been swallowed by her role. She has grown so accustomed to solitude that she almost prefers it. That preference is not comfort, it is survival. Through her, Lawson reflects the reality of countless bushwomen whose suffering went unnoticed, whose sacrifices were never recorded. They endured in silence. In the bush, survival is never optional. It is constant. The snake becomes more than an animal. It represents every hidden danger, every silent threat lurking beneath the floorboards of her life. Yet she does not panic. She calculates. She waits. She protects. Her life is a chain of tactical decisions. Whether fighting a raging bushfire or sitting awake all night with a stick in hand, she survives through grit and stubborn refusal to surrender. Lawson shows us that in this land, survival is not about bravery in grand moments. It is about persistence in small ones. The bush itself is no paradise. While other writers romanticized it as adventurous and beautiful, Lawson paints something harsher. Stunted trees, rotten wood, dust, heat, endless emptiness. The landscape is not nurturing, it is draining. It cracks the soil, and it cracks the spirit. The bush ages her before her time. It hardens her face, it steals softness. Here, people are not living with nature, they are fighting it every single day. And yet, love, maternal love, everything she does, every sleepless hour, every risk, is for her children. She lifts them onto the table to keep them safe. She keeps watch through the night while they sleep. She sacrifices rest, comfort, youth, perhaps even happiness. And in the final moment, as dawn arrives and the snake is dead, her son Jack sees her, truly sees her. When he says, "Mother, I won't never go drovin'," it is more than a promise. It is recognition. He sees the cost of the bush on her face. He sees her sacrifice. And in that quiet morning light, we understand something powerful. Her endurance was never for herself. It was a gift, a sacrifice to ensure her children might one day live a different life. Henry Lawson's The Drover's Wife is not simply a story about one night. It is a tribute to unseen women, a rejection of romantic myths, and a reminder that the greatest heroism is often silent, patient, and deeply human.
Comparison of the Chosen Vessel and the Drover's Wife. Let's look into the characteristics of the woman in The Chosen Vessel. She personifies vulnerability within the Australian wilderness, highlighting themes of danger, helplessness, and the importance of faith and resilience in survival. First one is vulnerable and fearful. The woman in the story exhibits palpable fear, especially of the swagman and the potential threat to her and her baby. Her fears are internalized, and her thoughts reveal her anxiety about her safety and the dangers lurking in the bush. Next is protective and resilient. Despite her fears, she demonstrates resilience by taking deliberate actions to keep herself and her child safe, such as barricading the house and praying for rescue. Next is religious and hopeful. Her prayers and reliance on divine intervention reveal a spiritual dimension, expressing her hope for salvation and safety through faith amid peril. Let's look into the characteristics of woman in The Drover's Wife. She symbolizes the rugged, resilient Australian bushwoman, embodying perseverance, strength, and the capacity to withstand relentless adversity without succumbing. First is strong and enduring. She is portrayed as a stoic, resilient woman who endures endless hardships, snakes, floods, loneliness, and the threat of violence, without complaint. Next is resourceful and independent. Her ability to manage the household, face dangers alone, and protect her children demonstrates resourcefulness and independence. Next is protective and self-sacrificing. Her primary concern is her family's safety and well-being, willing to face dangers alone to shield her children from harm. Then, realistic and reluctant to show weakness. She rarely shows overt fear outwardly. Instead, her strength is implied through her actions, resilience, and pragmatic attitude toward hardship. Similarities of two stories. Themes of isolation. Both stories depict women living in remote, lonely settings where they face the dangers of the bush alone. Female resilience. Each protagonist demonstrates strength and resourcefulness. Baynton's woman protects her child and faces lurking danger, while Lawson's wife endures hardships and defies the threats posed by the environment and lawlessness. Harsh environment. The Australian bush is a formidable backdrop that influences the characters' experiences, emphasizing survival and adversity. Differences between two stories. Tone and mood. Baynton's The Chosen Vessel has a tense, almost claustrophobic atmosphere with elements of fear and threat, especially surrounding the suspense of the swagman's intrusion. Lawson's The Drover's Wife presents a more resilient and stoic tone, highlighting endurance amid relentless hardship. Narrative focus. Baynton concentrates on a woman's internal fears and her protective instincts, emphasizing her vulnerability and courage in a threatening situation. Lawson's story focuses on the external hardships, snakes, floods, and loneliness, and the woman's perseverance in the face of constant danger. Perspective and style. Baynton's narrative is detailed and introspective, immersing the reader in the woman's fears and thoughts. Lawson's style is more straightforward and rugged, emphasizing action and the external environment's relentless pressures. Thank you for watching.